You know, it's kind of funny when you think about it, how alcohol's always there,
Right.
like celebrations, tough days, just hanging out. There's almost always a drink involved.
Yeah, it's pretty much woven into the fabric of our social lives, isn't it?
Totally. But that's what makes it so tricky sometimes, right? When does enjoying a drink become something, well, more serious? And that's exactly what we're diving into today, alcohol use disorder.
And it's a conversation worth having because, like you said, alcohol's so commonplace, it can be hard to tell the difference between, like, casual drinking and a real struggle with control.
100%. And to help us all get a grip on this, we've got a ton of research to unpack today. We really want to get into, like, not just what AUD is on the surface, but the why, the how,
Hmm.
the stuff that really matters.
Right, because what we're really talking about here isn't just liking to drink. It's about that point where it becomes, well, almost like a need. Like it overrides everything else, even when you know it's causing harm.
You've hit on a huge part of it, that loss of control the research keeps pointing to. But what does that actually look like in everyday life? That's what I'm curious about.
Well, it might not be as obvious as you think. It's not always this constant, like, obsession with alcohol. It's more about this cycle, right?
Yeah.
You get this craving, then you need to drink more to get that same feeling as before.
Yeah.
And then when you try to cut back, bam, you get hit with withdrawal. It's like being stuck on a crazy ride you can't get off of.
So it's definitely not just about willpower then, like some people might assume.
You're right, it's a really common misconception. AUD isn't about being weak-willed or anything like that. It's way more complex. Think of it like
Yeah.
it's this mix of biological stuff we're born with, our own psychology, and then, of course, all the social influences around us, like a perfect storm almost.
Okay, so let's unpack some of those storm clouds a bit. The research talks about family history, which makes sense, right? Like if you've got alcoholism in your family, you're more likely to experience it yourself. But then there's this whole other layer about age, which I found fascinating. Like our brains are more vulnerable at certain times.
Totally. Think about your teenage years. Your brain's basically under construction still,
Yeah.
right? Building all those crucial pathways and connections. Now imagine throwing heavy drinking into the mix during that time. The research is pretty clear. It can actually mess with the development of the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for, like, decision-making, thinking ahead, controlling impulses, all that good stuff.
So it's not just some abstract idea. It can have a real impact later in life just from drinking during those teenage years.
Exactly. And it's not only about starting young either. Even heavy drinking as an adult can change how your brain works, like literally rewire it.
Okay, so we're talking about some pretty serious brain changes here. What's the science behind that? I know the research mentioned something about neurotransmitters.
Right, neurotransmitters. Think of them like messengers in your brain. They're responsible for carrying all the important info, keeping everything running smoothly. But heavy drinking messes with those messengers. It throws them off balance. Like GABA, for example. GABA is a big one for relaxation, feeling chilled out. Alcohol actually messes with GABA. And over time, your brain might start to rely on the alcohol to get those feelings, which obviously can lead to dependence.
Wow. So it's not just about willpower, it's like you're messing with your brain chemistry. And hold on, it's not just our biology either, right? The research talked about environmental factors too, like how alcohol is, I don't know, advertised, how it's regulated, even just our social circles, all of that plays a role.
It's true. Those things can be so influential, but they kind of fly under the radar sometimes. Think about it, if you're always seeing ads that glamorize drinking or everyone around you is drinking heavily, it starts to feel normal.
Yeah, it's almost sneaky how those influences can shape our habits and perceptions without us even realizing it. Makes you really stop and think about the messages we're bombarded with all the time. It's like party equals drinking's practically hardwired into us. And then on top of all that, there's the whole mental health piece of the puzzle. I was blown away by the stat from the research. Something like 37% of people with AUD also have to deal with a serious mental health condition.
It is a pretty significant overlap. And it really highlights just how important it is to look the whole picture, not just one piece, when we're talking about diagnosis and treatment. It's not about one causing the other necessarily, but more that they often go hand in hand. Like you see conditions like PTSD, depression, anxiety. Those can make someone way more likely to turn to alcohol as like a coping mechanism, which, let's be real, can snowball pretty fast.
It's like slapping a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches, right?
Mm.
Might feel better for a minute, but it's not actually fixing the problem.
Exactly. And it can actually make things a whole lot worse in the long run.
So we've covered some pretty heavy stuff today, from the actual science of AUD to how it's affected by our environment and mental health. But for someone listening right now, I'm guessing knowing the signs, maybe in themselves, maybe in someone they care about, that's going to be huge.
You're absolutely right. Catching it early can be a game changer. And I think the big takeaway here is that AUD doesn't look the same for everyone. But there are some common things to watch for, like needing to drink more and more to get that same buzz, or having those withdrawal symptoms when you try to cut back.
Let's talk about those withdrawal symptoms for a sec, because I feel like a lot of people, they hear withdrawal and think, oh, just a really bad hangover. What's the real deal here?
Okay, imagine your body basically staging a full-on rebellion
Yeah.
because it's so used to having alcohol. That's withdrawal. It's your system basically screaming for it, and it's not pretty. Think like shaking, feeling sick to your stomach, sweating buckets, anxiety going through the roof, even trouble sleeping.
Yeah, not exactly a walk in the park. And these symptoms can stick around for days.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and sometimes even weeks. This is why it's so important for anyone who's been drinking heavily to talk to a doctor before trying to quit cold turkey.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not just about willpower at that point. It's about making sure your body is safe as it goes through detox.
Makes sense. So let's say someone listening is like, okay, this is ringing some bells.
Uh-huh.
What's the next step? Is it as simple as making a doctor's appointment and being like, hey, I think I might have a problem?
It really can be that straightforward, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Any good doctor, any healthcare professional worth their salt should be totally open to having an honest conversation about your drinking. They might ask about, like, your habits, any problems it's causing in your life, whether you've tried to cut back before, that sort of thing.
So no scary tests or anything.
Usually not. Most of the time, the diagnosis is based on your answers to those questions. Maybe they'll have you fill out a questionnaire too. They might do some tests to rule out other health stuff or just see what kind of impact the alcohol's had. But the biggest thing is just being upfront with your doctor.
And the earlier the better, I imagine.
100%. Remember what we were saying about those brain changes. The sooner you address the problem, the better chance you have of preventing things from getting worse and increasing your odds of bouncing back, like really recovering.
Which leads perfectly into my next question, prevention. I mean, knowing how much alcohol can actually rewire our brains, prevention seems even more crucial. So what can our listener do to protect themselves or even their loved ones?
The most straightforward answer, and it might seem kind of obvious, is moderation. Not drinking too much in the first place is, hands down, the most effective way to keep AUD from ever developing. But it's not just about what each of us does individually either.
Right, we were talking about those sneaky social influences before.
Exactly. We need to create a culture where people can talk openly and honestly about drinking responsibly, especially with young people. Like, we've got to challenge those messages that say it's cool to drink too much and push for policies that promote responsible drinking. That all plays a role in prevention.
So it's not just one thing, it's a whole bunch of things working together. It's about personal awareness for sure, but also about creating an environment that actually supports that.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so let's say someone's struggling, they're seeing the signs, and they're ready to reach out for help. What's next?
The research mentioned a bunch of different treatment options, which honestly can feel overwhelming in itself.
That's true. There's no magic one-size-fits-all solution, unfortunately. But that's also kind of a good thing, because it means there are options out there to fit different people's needs. You mentioned inpatient and outpatient. So inpatient is where you live at a facility that specializes in addiction treatment. Outpatient means you're living at home, but coming in for therapy sessions or support group meetings, things like that. And I'm curious about medication. Like, I know there are meds to help people quit smoking. Is it the same idea with alcohol?
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, if there were meds to help with those intense cravings or even to make drinking less appealing, that could make a world of difference for people, right?
Right. And that's where medication-assisted treatment, or MAT, comes in. It can be super effective. There are medications that can actually help reduce those cravings, make withdrawal symptoms less intense, and even make it physically unpleasant to drink alcohol. But it's really important to remember that medication works best when it's combined with other types of support. It's not like a magic bullet or anything.
Got it. So it's one tool in the toolbox, not the whole toolbox. Exactly. And that's where therapy comes in, both one-on-one and group therapy. Individual therapy can help you really dig into what's at the root of the AUD, develop healthier ways to cope with things, and build a strong foundation for, lasting change.
And what about group therapy? The research mentions support groups, and I'm curious to know more about those.
Oh, support groups like AA, for example, can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It's that whole thing of knowing you're not alone in this. They provide a sense of community, understanding, and accountability, which can be huge when it comes to recovery.
Right. It's that it takes a village idea again. But honestly, thinking about navigating all of this, finding the right treatment, the right therapist, the right support system, it can feel as daunting as the AUD itself, you know?
I hear that. It's a lot to process, especially when you're already going through a tough time. But the good news is there are resources out there to help with that too. Remember that NIA alcohol treatment navigator we talked about before?
Oh, right. From the research, it's like a directory for addiction treatment, right?
Exactly. It's
Hmm.
this awesome online tool created by the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. Basically, you just pop in your location, what you're looking for, and it helps you find treatment centers, therapists, support groups, all tailored to you.
That is cool. So it takes some of the guesswork out of it. Is it pretty user-friendly?
Yeah.
Asking for our listeners, of course.
Totally. They designed it to be super accessible and easy to use. I really do think it's a great first step for anyone who's feeling stuck or overwhelmed.
Awesome. Okay, so for anyone listening who's feeling that weight right now, head over to the NIAA Alcohol Treatment Navigator. It's a concrete step you can take today. And honestly, just remembering that asking for help is a sign of incredible strength, not weakness.
Couldn't agree more. It takes a lot of courage to face AUD head on. And the good news is, with the right support and the earlier stop, the better people can and do recover.
Hmm.
They go on to live full, meaningful lives.
That is incredibly reassuring to hear. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We dug into the science behind AUD, how it affects the brain, and how crucial it is to recognize the signs early on. And most importantly, I think we've highlighted all the different treatment options, resources that are out there so people know they're not alone.
Absolutely. And if there's one thing I want listeners to take away from this, it's that AUD doesn't discriminate. It can affect anyone, no matter your age, background, or anything else. The first step is understanding that it's a medical condition, not a moral failing.
Well said. And on that note, as we wrap up today, I'm left thinking about this. How can we as a society do a better job of understanding and supporting people who are dealing with AUD? How do we challenge those stigmas that are still so deeply ingrained and create an environment that uplifts and encourages people instead of shaming them? It's a conversation we all need to be a part of.